17 Hollywood celebrities who were famous for far more than their talent. Behind the studio lights and polished smiles, whispered stories followed these men into dressing rooms, private parties, and Hollywood legend. By the end of this video, you'll understand how rumor, myth, and masculinity helped turn private secrets into lasting fame. Forrest Tucker. Forrest Tucker entered Hollywood as a figure built for spectacle. Tall, broad, and unmistakably masculine, he carried himself with a physical presence that directors used to suggest authority before he spoke a line. Westerns and war films relied on that body language. Off camera, the same presence followed him into studio corridors and locker rooms, where colleagues spoke in lowered voices about an attribute that seemed to exceed even his imposing height. The stories did not begin in tabloids. They circulated first among crew members, costume fitters, and fellow actors. Wardrobe adjustments were described as unusually frequent. Tailors joked about extra fabric and special considerations, remarks later repeated in memoirs with a tone of amused disbelief. These anecdotes were never framed as scandal. They were told as curiosities, the kind that Hollywood traded quietly to humanize its stars. Tucker never confirmed anything. He did not deny it either. He allowed the reputation to exist beside his work, neither feeding it nor attempting to erase it. The nickname that followed him backstage suggested respect mixed with humor, not ridicule. It was the kind of label that only survives if the subject does not protest. Film historians later noted how such rumors fit perfectly into the mythology of the era. Studios sold strength, dominance, and confidence. Tucker's rumored physical advantage became an unspoken extension of the roles he played. Audiences saw men who filled the frame. Insiders believed the frame was not the only thing he filled. As years passed, the stories solidified into legend. Biographies repeated them carefully, often using euphemism and distance. No measurements. No proof. Just repetition. By the time of his later career, the myth had become inseparable from his name. Forrest Tucker remained remembered not only as a reliable leading man, but as one of the earliest examples of how Hollywood masculinity could be built as much on whisper as on performance. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra's image was crafted with precision. Slim frame. Sharp suits. Controlled movements. Yet behind the tailored exterior, Hollywood insiders insisted there was a contradiction too compelling to ignore. The contrast between his slight build and the rumors that followed him fueled fascination across decades. Sinatra's personal life provided fertile ground. His relationships were intense, public, and numerous. Women who moved through his orbit became part of a narrative that mixed romance with danger. Friends and associates hinted that his confidence was not merely psychological. Stories circulated about custom clothing and private accommodations made for reasons never stated directly. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Sinatra leaned into innuendo. He joked broadly about desire, power, and appetite. He understood suggestion better than denial. By allowing humor to replace embarrassment, he turned rumor into an accessory. The whispers enhanced his image as a man who lived without apology. Biographers recorded recollections from valets, musicians, and hangers-on. None claimed certainty. All claimed proximity. The repetition itself became evidence in the public imagination. His physical legend joined his vocal one, creating a persona that felt excessive in every direction. What mattered most was how these stories aligned with his music. Songs about longing and possession carried added weight when listeners believed the singer embodied them fully. Sinatra's rumored endowment became part of the emotional performance, even if it was never seen or verified. Long after his death, the legend persists. Not as crude gossip, but as an illustration of how Hollywood created gods from suggestion. Frank Sinatra remains proof that masculinity in the Golden Age was often defined by what could not be shown, only implied. Milton Berle. Milton Berle ruled early television with confidence and speed. His humor was bold, teasing, and self-aware. Behind the curtain, another reputation grew, one that rivaled his fame as an entertainer. Among performers and writers, his private anatomy became a recurring subject of jokes delivered with admiration rather than shock. The story spread quickly through studio hallways. Actors shared dressing rooms. Comedians traded exaggerations. Writers amplified what they heard. Berle's name surfaced again and again, always accompanied by the same implication. Unlike others, he did not treat the rumor as a threat. he treated it as material. Several contemporaries later recalled that Burleigh's reputation was discussed openly, even casually. It became a kind of shorthand. To mention him was to invite laughter and raised eyebrows. The absence of denial only strengthened the tale. Silence functioned as confirmation. As television grew, so did the myth. Unlike film stars, Burleigh appeared weekly in American homes. The intimacy of the medium gave the rumor a different texture. Audiences felt closer to him. Knowing or believing something hidden made that closeness feel illicit. In later years, Burleigh addressed the stories obliquely, sometimes joking about proportions and legacy without naming specifics. By acknowledging the existence of the legend, he claimed ownership of it. What might have embarrassed another man became part of his comedic armor. Historians of entertainment now point to Burleigh as a turning point. He demonstrated that male sexuality could be a public joke without destroying a career. His rumored endowment was not scandalized. It was celebrated, laughed at, and folded into his persona. Milton Berle's legacy endures as a reminder that Hollywood masculinity did not always rely on mystery alone. Sometimes it survived through audacity, humor, and the willingness to let myth run free. Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin stood at the center of silent cinema as a symbol of delicacy, innocence, and controlled emotion. His screen persona suggested fragility and restraint. Off-screen, a different story circulated quietly among studio insiders. Crew members and fellow performers repeated claims that his physical endowment was startlingly disproportionate to his small frame. The contrast itself fueled fascination. The more refined his image appeared, the more persistent the whispers became. These stories traveled through private gatherings rather than headlines. Writers and actors joked in closed rooms. Memoirs later referenced the rumor with careful language and amused distance. Chaplin never addressed it publicly. Silence allowed the legend to grow without contradiction. In an industry obsessed with illusion, the idea that something so hidden could be so excessive fit perfectly. Biographers noted that the rumor followed Chaplin through multiple relationships and marriages. It became an explanation offered by observers trying to rationalize his intense personal life. The stories were never proven. They did not need to be. Repetition created weight. Suggestion replaced evidence. Film historians later treated the rumor as an artifact of the era. It revealed how masculinity was measured even when cinema avoided explicit expression. Chaplin's genius remained unquestioned. The whispers simply added another layer to a man already defined by contradiction. Artistry and excess coexisted quietly in the background of his legacy. Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle. Roscoe Arbuckle's body was central to his comedy. Large, physical, and exaggerated, it defined his appeal on screen. Off-screen, that same body became the subject of darker rumor. Among the most persistent claims was that his physical endowment was unusually extreme, a detail later twisted into something sinister after scandal struck his life. Following the death of Virginia Rappe, gossip hardened into accusation. Whispers suggested that Arbuckle's body itself was dangerous. The idea spread quickly through newspapers and private conversations, despite the lack of medical proof. Trials ended in acquittal, yet the rumor survived the verdict. It became inseparable from the scandal. Biographies written years later repeated the claim cautiously, often to illustrate how public imagination can turn anatomy into narrative weapon. Arbuckle never escaped the shadow. The rumor shifted from curiosity to condemnation, showing how quickly Hollywood mythology could turn cruel. His career collapsed under the weight of suggestion. The physical trait once joked about became a symbol used to justify moral panic. Arbuckle's case remains one of the clearest examples of how rumor can outlive truth, transforming a human body into a cautionary tale within film history. Rudolph Valentino. Rudolph Valentino embodied desire in the silent era. His gaze, posture, and controlled movements defined early cinematic sexuality. Alongside that image grew persistent claims about a powerful physical endowment. The rumor aligned neatly with his reputation as an irresistible lover. Trade papers hinted without stating. Co-stars alluded with smiles and pauses. Admirers repeated the story as if it explained his effect on audiences. Valentino's masculinity was described as overwhelming, not loud but inevitable. The physical legend supported that idea. Unlike later stars, Valentino did not joke publicly about the whispers. He allowed mystery to serve him. Silence preserved allure. The rumor became part of his myth after his early death, repeated in biographies as one more reason he seemed larger than life. Film historians now view these stories as part of the construction of the first modern sex symbol. Valentino's body, both seen and imagined, became a canvas for fantasy. The legend endured because it fit what audiences already believed. Desire did not end with the image on screen. It extended into everything people were told but never shown. Clark Gable. Clark Gable represented controlled masculinity in post-war Hollywood. Broad shoulders, steady voice, and a calm authority defined his presence. Behind studio walls, a quieter narrative circulated. Colleagues and gossip writers repeated claims that his physical endowment matched the dominance he projected on screen. The stories were never loud. They were shared with restraint, often framed as knowing smiles rather than declarations. Gable did nothing to encourage the rumor. He maintained dignity and distance. That silence allowed imagination to fill the gaps. Tailors and costume designers hinted at special considerations without detail. Biographers later recorded these moments as fragments, careful not to overstep. The absence of denial was interpreted as quiet confirmation. The rumor aligned with the roles he played. Audiences believed in his authority because everything about him suggested completeness. The idea that his physical presence extended beyond what the camera showed fit comfortably within the myth. Over time, the whisper became part of his legend, repeated not as scandal but as texture. Clark Gable remained the model of classic Hollywood masculinity, strengthened by suggestion rather than exposure. Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson's image was built on scale and softness. Tall, handsome, and composed, he embodied an ideal that felt both powerful and gentle. Within industry circles, another layer existed. Persistent talk described an unusually impressive physical endowment, mentioned in backstage humor and private recollections. The contrast between his polished public image and these private stories fueled fascination. Directors and co-stars referenced the rumor indirectly. Jokes were coded. Language remained careful. Hudson never addressed it. His silence was strategic. In an era of rigid expectations, mystery offered protection. The whispers enhanced his image without forcing confrontation. Biographies written after his death revisited these stories as part of a broader reflection on hidden lives in Hollywood. The physical legend became symbolic rather than literal. It represented excess concealed beneath restraint. Rock Hudson's masculinity was both visible and imagined. The rumor endured because it reinforced the fantasy of the perfect leading man while never breaking the surface of his carefully managed persona. Burt Reynolds. Burt Reynolds entered cinema with swagger rather than polish. Confidence came first. Charm followed. Alongside his rise, stories spread quickly about a remarkable physical endowment. Unlike earlier stars, Reynolds allowed humor to coexist with rumor. Friends and collaborators spoke openly, often laughing as they recalled off-camera moments and playful exaggeration. The stories became part of his brand. Masculinity was no longer distant or formal. It was casual, loud, and self-aware. Reynolds rarely confirmed anything, but he never appeared uncomfortable with the attention. His ease suggested acceptance. That comfort made the rumor feel plausible. As his fame grew, the physical legend blended with his screen persona. Action roles, comedic bravado, and public interviews all reinforced the same image. Biographers treated the rumor as an extension of his cultural impact. Burt Reynolds became a symbol of a new era where male sexuality was openly acknowledged. The legend survived because it matched his attitude. Nothing hidden. Nothing denied. Just a story that fit the men audiences believed they knew. Billy Bob Thornton. Billy Bob Thornton built a reputation on rawness and unpredictability. His screen presence rejected polish and leaned into tension. Alongside that image, persistent backstage talk described an unusually impressive physical endowment. The stories circulated among crews and co-stars, delivered as jokes that carried familiarity rather than shock. The language stayed casual, as if the detail were simply another fact about him. Thornton never centered his identity on the rumor. He allowed it to exist at the edges, neither embraced nor denied. That indifference gave the story durability. Friends recalled moments of locker room humor and off-camera remarks that framed the claim as common knowledge. Biographies later repeated these recollections carefully, often to illustrate how his masculinity contrasted with his unconventional roles. The rumor functioned as counterpoint. A man who played damaged outsiders was imagined to possess an excess that challenged expectation. That contradiction made the legend stick. It suggested depth beneath restraint and power beneath quiet delivery. Thornton's cultural footprint expanded beyond film into music and public interviews, where the same rough authenticity reinforced belief. The story endured because it matched the tone of his persona. Nothing ornamental. Nothing denied. Just another piece of a man defined by tension. John Dillinger. John Dillinger never belonged to Hollywood, yet his myth rivaled movie stars. As a notorious outlaw, his image grew through photographs, headlines, and government narratives. Within that mythology emerged a bizarre claim about an extraordinary physical endowment. The rumor surfaced after his death, fueled by sensational retellings and misinterpretations of evidence. The story spread through crime lore rather than entertainment pages. Some accounts suggested exaggeration by authorities seeking humiliation. Others blamed poor documentation and eager imaginations. Regardless of origin, the claim persisted. It became a symbol of excess attached to rebellion, reinforcing the idea that Dillinger defied limits in every sense. Historians later dismissed the specifics while acknowledging the power of the tale. The body became a prop in a larger narrative about masculinity and notoriety. The rumor mattered less for truth than for effect. It transformed a criminal into folklore. John Dillinger's legend illustrates how physical mythology can escape cinema and root itself in public imagination, sustained by repetition rather than fact. John Holmes. John Holmes occupied a different cultural space entirely. In adult entertainment, physical endowment was currency. Holmes became famous precisely because of it. His reputation rested on scale, endurance, and visibility. Unlike others, there was no whisper. The attribute was central to his identity and openly discussed. Industry insiders measured and mythologized the detail, turning it into marketing language. Stories grew with each retelling, amplified by interviews, documentaries, and books. Holmes' career thrived on exaggeration. The line between fact and legend blurred deliberately. Insurance rumors and exhibition claims added spectacle. After his death, the legend hardened. Historians of adult cinema treated him as an emblem of an era defined by excess. The physical story eclipsed the man, becoming a shorthand for a culture that rewarded extremes. John Holmes remains a case where myth was not hidden. It was displayed, consumed, and remembered as the defining feature of fame outside traditional Hollywood. John Hamm. John Hamm represents a modern echo of classic Hollywood masculinity. Tall, composed, and controlled, his public image is built on restraint rather than excess. Within industry circles, however, a persistent rumor followed him early in his career. Crew members and co-stars spoke quietly about a physical endowment that seemed at odds with his tailored appearance. The contrast became the point of fascination. The stories gained momentum through subtle visual moments and backstage commentary rather than direct statements. Hamm never addressed the claims. Silence preserved ambiguity. In an era dominated by social media, the lack of confirmation allowed speculation to thrive without becoming scandal. The rumor functioned as texture, not headline. What mattered was how easily the story aligned with the roles he played. Authority, confidence, and quiet dominance defined his characters. The imagined physical excess reinforced that perception. John Hamm demonstrates how modern celebrity still relies on suggestion. The methods have changed. The mechanism remains the same. Liam Neeson. Liam Neeson's presence is built on gravity. His voice, posture, and stillness communicate power before action begins. Alongside that presence, long-standing whispers describe an unusually robust physical endowment. The stories appear most often in casual interviews and recollections from colleagues, delivered with humor rather than shock. Neeson never engaged with the rumor. His public persona remained serious and private. That separation strengthened the myth. Audiences projected physical authority onto a man who rarely invited scrutiny. The rumor served as an extension of the strength he embodied on screen. Biographers later noted how the claim functioned symbolically. It suggested completeness, an excess hidden beneath discipline. In modern Hollywood, where masculinity is often questioned or softened, Neeson's legend endured because it felt old-fashioned. The The story persisted not because it was proven, but because it fit the image people already believed. Michael Fassbender. Michael Fassbender's reputation is rooted in intensity. His performances are physical, psychological, and exposed. Within that openness, industry whispers emerged about a notably impressive physical endowment. Unlike earlier eras, these stories spread quickly through informal interviews and behind-the-scenes commentary. Fassbender neither confirmed nor distanced himself. The rumor blended into his image as a performer unafraid of vulnerability or confrontation. The physical legend reinforced the sense of risk audiences associated with his roles. Nothing about it felt accidental. Film writers later framed the rumor as part of a new type of masculinity. Less hidden. Less ceremonial. Still mythic. Fassbender's case shows how contemporary cinema continues to recycle old narratives using modern language. The body remains a symbol of power, even when presented indirectly. From whispered corridors to public imagination, the pattern remains unchanged. Hollywood has always built legends from suggestion rather than proof. Across generations, male stardom absorbed rumor and reshaped it into myth. Physical endowment became shorthand for power, dominance, and excess when language failed to describe desire directly. These stories endured because they satisfied curiosity without requiring evidence. What survives is not fact, but repetition. In that space between what is shown and what is imagined, Hollywood mythology continues to live,